Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are continuing journal collection number 44. 44 is going to be divided into three parts, I've decided. You probably noticed that the previous video of part 1 was shorter than average. It was around 30 minutes. These next two will be around the same length of time. And I felt I should do that because it felt like it would otherwise be a little bit too long. And the one I had previous to that at the end of 43 felt like it was a little on the bloated side. I'm not adding anything to the text or anything. It's just I like to keep them around the 40-minute mark, and I vary in my ability to be able to accomplish that. Anyway, with that said, we will go ahead and get started on this particular section. And there's not a date given, but it is a topic, and I will go ahead and read that. The topic is Conduct of Intellect. Archimedes and Newton and other stark thinkers stretched and breathed themselves by a matchless feat of new thinking now and then, and left it so. They did not go to repeating the particular problem they had solved and applying it to everything, but went on to something else. The game of intellect seems the perception in lucid moments that whatever befalls or can be stated is a universal proposition, and contrariwise that every general statement is poetical again by being particularized or impersonated. Freedom, yes, but that is a thing of degrees. Is one of the slaveholders free? Not one. See the snakes wriggle and wind. Is a man free whose conscience accuses him of thefts and lies and indulgences without number? No. Is he free whom I see when my eyes are anointed to be always egotistical and blinded by his preference of himself? A humble man can see, but a proud man and a vain man are patients for the oculist. England. The English government is gentlemanlike. If any national benefit has been rendered, if the arts have been advanced, if science has been served, the government may be relied on to be just and generous to the man who has served them, as Paxton, Fellows, Stevenson, Franklin, Rowland Hill. I believe that it is far better than the American government in this point where the venality of Congress, and then the editor says that the sentence was left unfinished. The English are like a family to which a promise has been given that a male heir shall never be wanting. They have always a wealth of men to fill important posts, and the concentrated attention on such posts ensures the selection of a competent person. The public service must not suffer. Too much property is at stake. The younger Pitt was a jockey to hold the reins of power, neither stiff nor slack. Otherwise, not a man of notable ability. Thurlows and Cannings and Foxes and Grenvilles abound in London. The whole civility and polity are rude and initial. It is only custom and ignorance which flatter it with superlatives. The giddy absurdity of tying up a nation and untying a badly educated, stubborn boy because disqualified by his education as a prince, letting loose his folly and passion, which should be confined to a penitentiary, on the interest of a nation of men, and padlock progress and keep at a standstill all that has been gained, shows the extreme rudeness of Europe. Whiggery. The insufferable folly of keeping the weal of millions at risk and every interest of science, of charity, of morals, and of humanity at halt on so despicable a chance as the will of a single Russian gentleman will not long impose on the common sense of mankind. Some third way will be thought of between anarchy and this puerile makeshift of an irresponsible rogue. Monarchy stands on the timidity of property. Property must not be disturbed. It can better pay blackmail to one king than run the risk of revolution. Quote, Lord Thurlow, when Chancellor, asked me if I did not think that a wooden machine might be invented to draw bills and answers in Chancery. Eldon, 1, page 167. Agricultural. Cattle show. The Newtown Pippins, gentlemen, are they not the Newtown Pippins, or is not this the very Pippin that demonstrated to Sir Isaac Newton the fall of the world, not the fall of Adam, but of the moon to the earth in universal gravity? Well, here they are, a barrel of them, every one of them good to show gravitation, and good to eat, every one as sound as the moon. What will you give me for a barrel of moons? July. Short way with slaveholders. I read last night a letter from L.T. to L.F., stating that he had learned from a scientific person that sulfate of copper, commonly called blue vitriol, used in small quantities in the manufacture of wheat flours, had important effects in increasing the docility of the people who eat it, and he proposed to introduce such manufacture on a large scale into the southern states, with a view to reduce the stubbornness of the population, to the end of an easier removal of slavery. He therefore asks Mr. F. at what price he can supply him with 240 tons of this article in the autumn, with the prospect of much larger purchase hereafter. He proceeds to say that great caution must be used in the introduction of this article, and that a number of bakers must be sent with instructions to use it, and that the project should be confidential. Would like also to have Mr. F. take the opinions of Abbot Lawrence and Senator Everett and others, who may have information as to the use of this article in Europe. Mr. F. sent the letter to Dr. Charles T. Jackson, who replied that the use of the article is an outrageous fraud and is forbidden on high penalties in England and France, as it is rank poison. July. It is a great loss to lose the confidence of a class. Yet the scholar, the thinker goes on losing the ear and love of class after class who once sustained him. The scholar isolates himself by the sweet opium which he has learned to chew, and which he calls muses, and memory and philosophy. Now and then he meets another scholar, and then says, "See, I am rewarded for my truth to myself and calling by the perfect sympathy I here find." But meantime he is left out more and more, and at last utterly, by society, and his faculties languish for want of invitation and objective work, until he becomes that very thing which they taunt him with being, a self-indulgent dreamer. In an intellectual community he would be steeled and sharpened with burnished to a strong Archimedes or Newton. Society makes him the imbecile it accuses him of being. On the rocks of Nahant the chemical texture of the world appeared, and statistics is also a rock of Nahant to show that the world is a crystal and God a chemist. Editor's note. To the regret of Mr. Emerson, Mr. Norton, and his many friends in New England, Clow had suddenly returned to England in July, having been offered a place in the Education Office, which, with its assured salary, would allow of his marriage. He had frequently spent Sundays in Mr. Emerson's home, where he was most welcome to the elders and the children. Carlyle, writing to Mr. Emerson in early autumn, said, "Clow is settled in his office. I think he is now likely to continue here, and here, too, he may do us some good. Of America, at least of New England, I can perceive he has brought away an altogether kindly, almost filial impression, especially of a certain man who lives in that section of the earth. More power to his elbow." End note. England. My belief is that nobody landed on this island with impunity, that the popular fable of spellbound homes of enchanters was fact in England. The climate and conditions, labor and rough weather, transformed every adventurer into a laborer, and each vagabond that arrived submitted his neck to the yoke of avarice and ambition, or found the air too tense for him to exist in. The race avails much, but the genius of the place also is despotic, and will not have any frivolous person. Malthus is the right organ of English proprietors, but we shall never understand political economy until we get Barringer or Burns or some poet to teach it in songs, and they won't teach Malthuism. and there is no subject that does not belong to the poet. Manufacturers and stock brokerage, as much as sunsets and souls, only the things placed in their true order are poetry, but displaced, or put in kitchen order, they are unpoetic. 'Tis curious that Christianity, which is idealism, is sturdily defended by the brokers and steadily attacked by the idealists. Horatio Greenough. Editor's note. Greenough had been cut off in his prime by brain fever, December 18th, 1852. At the time he was delivering a course of lectures on art in Boston. It is said that he left sketches for the work of the next 20 years. A memorial of him, containing his papers on art and other subjects, and preceded by a life of the artist by H.T. Tuckerman, was published in 1853. In a letter to Carlyle, Mr. Emerson said, quote, "Our few fine persons are apt to die. Horatio Greenough, a sculptor, but whose tongue was far cunninger in talk than his chisel to carve, and who inspired great hopes, died 2 months ago at 47 years." Correspondence, Volume 2, page 219. End of note. I do not think of any American in the century who would make so good a subject for a lecture as Greenough. But oh, to hear again his own eloquent and abounding discourse! But he passed away suddenly like the brightest of mornings. I account that man, one product of American soil, born in Boston, as one of the best proofs of the capability of this country. We have one memorial of him always before us. He gave the model of the Bunker Hill Monument. He said, "An obelisk says but one word, here, but it speaks very loud." There is a kind of retardation in the English youth. Every man is a possible lord, but they have so many men that they are obliged to keep back the vast majority by checking, and in the state of neuters, as candidates for place as soon as any accident happens to the Queen or great officers. Here follows a untranslated French quotation by Léonce de Lavernay. July 21st. Fate and Instinct. Fatalism, the right formula to be holden, but by a clever person who knows to allow the living instinct. For though that force be infinitely small, infinitesimal against the universal chemistry, it is of that subtlety that homeopathically doses the system. All Hanover Street was abroad, mountains of ordinary women, firm bounds of brass and pudding stone set to every one of them, and liquidity or flowing power nowhere. Abolition. If you can get Russian tactics into your political representation, so as to ensure the fidelity of your representative to the sentiment of the constituency, by making him more afraid of his constituents than he is of his opponents, you will get your will done. August. At Lenox, Miss Blank congratulated herself that Blank had settled down into sensible opinions and practices like her neighbors. I asked her if she thought her two sisters, who had complied with the sensible notions and practices, had quite succeeded. That I perhaps did not think quite as respectfully as she did of Boston and New York. That what she called a success seemed to me a poor thing, and, as those examples betrayed, a mere fetch, or a dose of brandy to drown thought. But only had the more degrading those who succeeded. Had New York succeeded? Were the gentlemen of New York entirely satisfied with their manly performance? As far as I am informed, they are ruled by some rowdy aldermen who are notorious rogues and blacklegs. They must feel very clean in going down Wall Street, whilst Mr. Rynders cows them. Is their political conscience sweet and serene as they find themselves represented at Albany and Washington? As for these people, they have miserably failed, and 'tis very fine for them to put on airs. The veriest monk in a college is better than they. As to Blank, I was far from thinking she had ended her experiments. It is her glory that she takes her life in her hand, and is ready for a new world. In New York, Henry James quoted Thackeray's speeches in society. Quote, he liked to go to Westminster Abbey to say his prayers, etc. Quote, it gave him the comfort, blessed feeling, He thought Thackeray could not see beyond his eyes and has no ideas, and merely is a sounding board against which his experiences thump and resound. He is the merest boy. These New Yorkers and Lenox people think much of New York, little of Boston. The Bostonians are stiff, dress badly, never can speak French with good accent. The New Yorkers have exquisite millinery, tournure, great expense, and on being presented, the men look at you and instantly see whether your dress and style is up to their mark. If not, and expense is a great part of the thing, they never notice you. Quote, these girls, any one of them, said Thackeray at a party to a German prince in New York, has more diamonds on her back than are in all your principality. And C said that it was difficult to go into any society in New York, without you were in condition to give parties too. The artists, she said, were very worldly and will not go anywhere unless they are to have suppers and champagne. She told H. she had heard more about money from him and them than ever before. Henry James found all these artists poor things, vain, conceited nobodies, and E. H. finds in Boston the question of society is that of who gives dinners. The Boston women spend a great deal of money on rich and rare dresses, and have no milliner of taste who can say, this stuff, this color, this trimming, this ensemble does not suit you. In New York, the milliners have the skill. Mrs. Perkins at the opera heard a dressmaker say, how dowdy all the Boston ladies are. Mrs. Perkins is dowdy. Cheering amidst all this trifle was the reading of Charles Newcome's letters. The golden age came again, the true youth, the true heroism, the future, the ideal. I could hardly sit to read them out. I was penitent for having ever mistrusted him, for having chided his impatience, and resolved at once to write him and assure him of my loyalty. Swedenborg rose too, and all the gods out of earth and air and ocean, if only they would reconcile the two worlds, and make us fit for and contented with either. Only of Charles I would give much to know how it all lies in his mind. I would know his inmost sincerity, know what reserves he makes when he talks divinely. I would rather know his real mind than any other persons I have ever met. For it is still true that each makes one immense exception in his love and homage to the canon of nature, one reserve, namely, of all his own rights and possibilities. I told Alcott that I should describe him as a man with a divination or good instinct for the quality and character of wholes, as a man who looked at things in a little larger angle than most other persons, and as one who had a certain power of transition from thought to thought, as by secret passages, which it would tax the celerity and subtlety of good metaphysicians to follow. But he has the least shop value of any man. He were a very bad Englishman. He has not wrought his fine clay into vases, nor his gold dust into ingots. All the great masters finish their works to the eye and hand, as well as to the divine reason, to the shop as well as to the gods. But he is an inestimable companion, because he has no obligations to old or new, but is free as if new-born. But he is not careful to understand you. If he get half a meaning that serves his purpose, 'tis enough. Henry Thoreau sturdily pushes his economy into houses, and thinks it the false mark of the gentleman that he is to pay much for his food. He ought to pay little for his food. Ice, he must have ice, and it is true that for each artificial want that can be invented and added to the ponderous expense, there is new clappings of hands, of newspaper editors and the donkey public. To put one more rock to be lifted betwixt a man and his true ends. If Socrates were here, we could go and talk with him. That Longfellow we cannot go and talk with. There is a palace and servants and a row of bottles of different colored wines and wine glasses and fine coats. Thought is nothing but the circulations made luminous. There's no solitary flower and no solitary thought. Send your girls to boarding schools, to Madame Hicks, or to French ladies in New York to learn address, that they may surmount or platform of these female bullies who make the women of fashion, and be quite able to confront them ever after, as possessed of their secret also. It will save an impressionable child many mortifications, and need not make a fashionist of her. The Americans have the underdose. I find them not spiced with equality. What poor mots, what poor speeches they make! 'Tis all like Miss Joanna's stories, wherein all the meaning has to be imputed. Oh, if you could only have heard him say it! Say what? Why, he said, yes, but with so much intelligence. Well, John Adams said, Independence forever, and Sam Adams said, Oh, what a glorious morning is this, and Daniel Webster said, I still live, and Edward Everett will say when he comes to die, Oh dear, and General Cushing will say, Oh my, and General Butler will say, Damn. And however brilliant in the first and second telling these speeches may be, they somehow lack the Plutarch virility. Editor's note. Mr. Emerson was glad to take excursions from home during the months of August and September, for with his growing family and frequent guests, the time had come to enlarge the upper story of his house by building a spacious chamber for his wife and himself over the parlor, sunny and with pleasant outlooks towards the village and Walden woods. Also, he had a concealed den in the garret to secure absolute privacy for himself in stress of writing, or perhaps afford refuge to a fugitive slave. End note. Cape Cod, September 5th. Went to Yarmouth Sunday 5th, to Orleans Monday 6th, to Nauset Light on the back side of Cape Cod. Collins, the keeper, told us he found obstinate resistance on Cape Cod to the project of building a lighthouse on this coast, as it would injure the wrecking business. He had to go to Boston and obtain the strong recommendation of the Port Society. From the high hill in the rear of Higgins's in Orleans, I had a good view of the whole Cape and the sea on both sides. The Cape looks like one of the Newfoundland banks just emerged, a huge tract of sand, half covered with poverty grass and beach grass, and for trees, a bell and locust, and plantations of pitch vine. Some good oak and in Dennis and Brewster were lately good trees for ship lumber, and they still are well wooded on the east side, but the view I speak of looked like emaciated Orkneys, Mull, Islay, and so forth, made of salt, dust, gravel, and fish bones. They say the wind makes the roads, and, as at Nantucket, a large part of the real estate was freely moving back and forth in the air. I heard much of the coming railroad, which is about to reach Yarmouth and Hyannis, and they hope will come to Provincetown. I fancy the people were only waiting for the railroad to reach them in order to evacuate the country, for the stark nakedness of the country could not be exaggerated. But no, nothing was less true. They are all attached to what they call the soil. Mr. Collins had been as far as Indiana, but, he said, hill on hill, he felt stifled and longed for the Cape where he could see out. And whilst I was fancying that they would gladly give away land to anybody who would come and live there and be a neighbor, no, they said all real estate had risen all over the Cape, and you could not buy land at less than $50 per acre. And in Provincetown, a lot on the front street of 40 feet square would cost $500 or $600. Still, I saw at the Cape, as at Nantucket, they are a little tender about your good opinion, for if a gentleman at breakfast says he don't like Yarmouth, all real estate seems to them at once depreciated 2 or 3%. They are very careful to give you directions, what road you shall take from town to town, but as the country has the shape of a piece of tape, it is not easy to lose your way. For the same reason it behooves everybody who goes on to the Cape to behave well, as he must stop on his return at all the same houses unless he takes the packet at Provincetown for Boston, 6 hours in good weather and a week in bad. The sand grinds the glass at Nauset light, and soon makes it unfit for use. The sand grinds the tires of the wheels of the stagecoach. I found at Yarmouth the deerberry, Vaccinium staminum, and at Dennis the chrysopsis. The Arabs say that the lion's roar says, I and the son of the woman, Ana u el ben Mera. Quote, Nature, which could not foresee our civil arrangements, contented herself with making women amiables at Legers, but with a certain facility, and light-hearted because that sufficed to her views. The same interest which was wished that there should be a constant association between the sexes, has also exacted of them sentiments more stable than those which nature had given them. Be it as it may, it is on this tottering base that the edifice of society reposes, and it is not doubtful that we ought to give them credit for the virtue or the address with which they sustain it. Roussel, Apud Grimm, Part 3, Volume 1. The one thing not to be forgiven to intellectual persons is that they believe in the ideas of others. Then there is a French quotation here, and it says it's from De Noailles, you cannot free yourself from your times. And then another untranslated quotation from Chateaubriand. People value thoughts, not truths. Truth not until it has passed through the mold of some man's mind, and so is a curiosity and an individualism. But ideas as powers they are not up to valuing. It occurred in the crowd of beauties on the pave of Broadway that we grow so experienced that we are dreadfully quick-sighted, and in the youngest face detect the wrinkles that shall be, and the gray that hastens to discolor these meteor tresses. We cannot afford, then, to live long, or nature, which lives by illusions, will have disenchanted us too far for happiness. Editor's Note. Here follow many quotations from Toussaint's Passional Zoology, of which a few are given. End note. September 8th. Quote, the Rhodian, the double rose, solved Malthus's problem, since it had said that a flower which becomes double is a flower that transforms its stamens into petals, and which consequently becomes barren by exuberance of sap and richness. Quote, fecundity is curbed by surrounding all women with the delights of luxury, comprising the incentives of attractive labor. Quote, no public establishment in Paris possesses a hall vast enough to contain the crowds of both sexes that would be drawn by the mere announcement of a course of passional chemistry, physics, or astronomy. I ask only Lamartine's gift of speech, with the right of opening a course on passional botany. They would come from Naples and Stockholm to hear me. Nature is a mistress of conversation. She does not preach through pumpkin stalks discourses on the value of clothing, but contents herself with sending a cold day, and putting down a buffalo or an Angola goat, a few sheep, and a few cotton plants within sight. Horses. Bayard, horse of Renaud de Montauban, which Roland, nephew of Charlemagne, tried to obtain, understood his master's speech as if he had been his son, beat the earth with his forefeet as if it had been a harp, ran away from Charlemagne, and still in the forest of Ardennes neighs loud and clear to be heard all over France on St. John's Day. How Bayard mystified the Emperor Charlemagne, see Revue des Deux Mondes, Tome 5, page 312. Arnaud de Gascon's horse could at the age of 100 years make 100 leagues in a day without stopping and without blowing. On the whole, in the stories of the Round Table, the horses show rather more good sense and conduct than their riders. The horse Marco Polo of Raphael Fabretti, the antiquary, stood still and pointed when he came near an antiquity. See his master's life by Visconti and Biographie Universelle, Hallam, 4, page 69. Being once present at the creation, I saw that from each man as he was formed, a piece of the clay of which he was made was taken, and set apart for him as goods or property, and it was allowed him to receive this in whatever form he desired, whether as wife, friend, son, daughter, or as house, land, warehouses, merchandises, horses, libraries, gardens, ships. Also, he might have it now in one of these forms, and at his will it was converted into another. But because it was one and the same lump out of which all these were fashioned, and as that was the clay of his own body, all these things had one and the same taste and quality to him, and he died at last of ennui. What a rich and extraordinary genius is Lord Clarendon, the historian, yet he is obscure in the crowd of English writers. This is the end of Part 2 of Emerson's Journal Collection number 44, dating from the year 1853 when the author was 50 years old. Thank you for listening.